I call this hearing to order and a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Before we proceed, just some ground rules for this hybrid hearing. Any connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved as quickly as possible. One thing to note as well, when you're recognized, just you need to unmute your microphone, pause for a couple of seconds so that everything's captured on the live stream. And if you wish to have any documents inserted into the record, please just ask for unanimous consent and email that over to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure that all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Any questions from any of the members before we proceed? Well, hearing none, we will move forward, and I ask unanimous consent that Representatives Davis, Cahelli, and Ocasio-Cortez be permitted to join today's hearing so that if they speak about their bills on the agenda, if they're able to join us. Without objection, so ordered. I want to welcome all members and witnesses to today's Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee hearing entitled Strengthening Accountability, Fairness, and Oversight at VA. During today's first panel, we will hear from the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA Office of Inspector General, and the Government Accountability Office. For the second panel, we will hear from our representatives of 4 VSOs, including the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Modern Military Association of America, and Minority Veterans of America. So welcome to everyone who's here in the room and joining us virtually, and I want to recognize myself for an opening statement. At today's Oversight Investigation Subcommittee hearing, we're going to examine 10 bills which seek to improve our ability to better serve our nation's veterans. These bills would strengthen accountability, fairness, and oversight at the Department of Veterans Affairs. All are based on the ongoing work of the subcommittee, and they delve into many corners of VA. They address problems that veterans face across our nation or have stymied the department's work for many years. I'm pleased that overall the legislation shows a bipartisan nature of this subcommittee. Many are sponsored by members on both sides of the aisle and are largely the result of what this subcommittee learned during previous hearings, joint briefings, and ongoing oversight projects. While we haven't reached agreement on all of the bills, I believe we have a solid understanding, if not consensus, over the intentions and direction, and I know our dialogue is going to continue. I was glad to see that the department's testimony voices support for many of the bills under consideration. In fact, a few of these bills build upon important VA initiatives. Today, we're also going to hear testimony from several veteran service organizations, and I'm really pleased to see the overall support in their testimony for many of the bills under consideration. The GAO and VA Office of Inspector General provide the subcommittee with important insights on a wide range of issues. And in fact, one of today's bills offered by Representatives Underwood and McKinley would improve the IG's ability to do its job by educating the VA workforce on how to work with the Office of Inspector General. And so I look forward to Mr. Wilbur's comments on this important piece of legislation. We've got several other bills that will also bring greater accountability to the work of VA. The bill I've authored with Ranking Member Mann, the Improving Oversight of the Veterans Community Care Providers Act, is based on the findings and recommendations by the Government Accountability Office. It would take several critical steps to ensure that health care providers in VA's community care program meet the program's high standards of eligibility. Likewise, the legislation by Chairwoman Loria would give new authority for the department to work with other federal agencies in order to detect and recover duplicate payments made by the community care program, likely saving taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. Through congressional oversight spanning several years, we've learned that the Faster Payments to Veteran Survivors Act is needed to ensure a more timely payment of those benefits that are owed to families after the death of a veteran. This financial support is often an important lifeline to families during a time of sadness and need, and I've introduced this legislation with Representative Mace. We have several bills to ensure fairness and equity for veteran VA health care and benefit programs. Representative Davids introduced the Improving VA Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access Act, which builds upon several initiatives of the department. This has been an ongoing priority for the administration and the committee. Representative Ocasio-Cortez has legislation to establish stronger working relationships with many private sector and educational institutions, such as historically black colleges and universities and other minority-serving institutions, to bring new opportunities for VA recruitment. Chairman Mervan's bill would require VA to finally centralize much of its veteran information so that the many different offices and programs can have access to consistent and complete information about our veterans. Finally, the bipartisan bill of Representative Cahelli and Mace establishes a much-needed center for LGBTQ+ veterans that would complement and coordinate between often disparate activities across the department. Today, we'll also consider legislation to address VA supply chain issues. This follows multiple subcommittee hearings about VA's antiquated and problem-plagued medical and surgical supply system. The minority legislation has many important elements to ensure that the department has a modern and effective system. The minority has also offered a bill aiming to reform the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection. We know that whistleblowers are essential to the department and are vital to bringing to light waste, fraud, and abuse. Ranking Member Mann and I share the same goal, which is a Department of Veterans Affairs where whistleblowers have their rights protected. But we know that the unfortunate reality is far too many of these whistleblowers are ignored by VA. Even when clear cases of retaliation are proven, the process can last for years with the department dragging its feet to make the whistleblower whole. So I applaud Ranking Member Mann for bringing forward his bill today, and while I'm not yet ready to endorse it, I know that we can forge consensus. I've had many opportunities to meet with Assistant Secretary Donaghy, who I know is dedicated to improving VA's whistleblower office, and her testimony today will provide an important perspective on legislative solutions. So I look forward to this discussion here today in this slimmed down, efficient committee hearing that we have going on. And with that, I want to recognize Ranking Member Mann for his comments, and then we'll delve right into the questions. Ranking Member Mann.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Pappas, and thank you for continuing the bipartisan tradition of this subcommittee by bringing 11 bills before us today, including 2 Republican proposals. To all our witnesses, I'm sorry that we had to waive the opening statements. I know you all put a lot of hard work into these, and I appreciate the work that you do for all of our veterans. I also want to thank the chairman for your flexibility today. While I'm generally supportive of the goals and intentions of many of the bills before us, I do have some questions about several drafting and technical aspects, which I hope to gain clarity on before giving my full support. I'm pleased to see that my bill, H.R. 6638, is on the agenda today. I was proud to introduce this bill that would seek to reform the VA Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, or OAWP. This office was created by the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017, and while well-intentioned, I think time has shown that the office is duplicative and not serving the needs of whistleblowers. With an annual budget of around $22 million, OAWP has cost taxpayers roughly $115 million in its 5 years of existence and has not returned anywhere near that value of its work. My bill would refocus the mission of OAWP by requiring the transfer of investigative functions from OAWP to the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, or OSC. As I mentioned at our first legislative hearing on reforms to OAWP last year, the staff of OSC have decades of experience in providing truly independent investigations of whistleblower claims, and I believe their experience and independence would be a better solution to give VA whistleblowers the support and the protection that they deserve. I've proposed the change because despite the best efforts of Assistant Secretary Donaghy, it is clear that we still don't know if the recommendations of OAWP are meeting the needs of the department. By law, the Secretary is required to send a notification of our commitment if VA does not take the proposed recommendation of OAWP for proposed discipline by VA senior leader. These notices have been piling up and were stuck in the bureaucratic concurrence process. We only received them after Chairman Pappas, Senator Moran, and I wrote a letter to the Secretary insisting that they be released. The batch processing of these notices is not compliant with the law and significantly hinders Congress awareness and oversight. The oldest OAWP recommendation included in this batch was issued on April 5th, 2022, almost exactly 2 years ago. This is unacceptable for our veterans. I will continue to insist the VA provided these notices to us in a timelier manner and in compliance with the law. I also believe it is time for a new approach, as there does not seem to be a sense of urgency by the Biden administration to provide Congress with the long foretold complete review of OAWP's organization and practices. It's been 9 months since Assistant Secretary Donaghy's appointment, and it is unfair for us to have to continually ask for the results of this review or her accomplishments since. According to the most recent data we have received from OAWP, VA leaders are still not accepting almost 30% of OAWP's recommendations, and we still do not know if that is because of faulty investigations or poor decision-making by department leaders. Despite receiving my bill almost 6 weeks ago, late last week we were told that the department was not going to make Assistant Secretary Donaghy or anyone from OAWP available for this hearing to answer our questions. I'm glad the department abandoned this unwise strategy and are represented today. While there is agreement that reforms at OAWP are needed, we have still not reached a bipartisan consensus on what these reforms should be. I look forward to continuing to work with the chairman as we find the best model that protects whistleblowers and promotes accountability. In return, we will ensure that veterans continue to be served well by the VA. With the time left that I have, I would like to say that I am also pleased to see the draft legislation to authorize VA to implement a supply chain management IT system is included on our agenda today. Over the past year, we've seen the implementation of DIML's system hit snag after snag. It's time for VA to select a new system that actually meets its needs. I think it's also time for our committee to start authorizing big IT projects. Deferring to VA to make all the decisions and then rubber stamping them has not served us well. To develop this draft bill, staff read through all of VA's reports and studies about its supply chain needs. The legislation includes those requirements as we understand them. We need to make sure VA uses a transparent process to select a supply chain management system that is truly best in class. We also need to make sure that the system meets all the needs of the department and can be rolled out quickly enough to make a difference. In the coming months, I look forward to working on the language of this bill with VA, Chairman Pappas, Technology Modernization Subcommittee Chairman Mervan, and Ranking Member Rosendale, and other members. I thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to our discussion on how to improve the bills before us today. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Mann. And as he mentioned, in order to have ample time for questions and to be respectful of everyone's time here, given the delay from votes, we will have to forego oral testimony by today's witnesses, but rest assured that everyone's written testimony was received. It will become part of the hearing record, and I ask for unanimous consent that the subcommittee accept the witnesses' full testimony for the record, and we will proceed directly to questions. And so with that, I will now recognize our witnesses. First, we have Mr. Edward Murray, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Management and Deputy Chief Financial Officer, the Office of Management at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Welcome. He's accompanied by Ms. Mary Ann Donaghy, Assistant Secretary for Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, Harvey Johnson, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Resolution Management, Diversity and Inclusion, Mr. Dan Keenegan, Executive Director, VA Insurance Service, Veterans Benefits Administration, and Ms. Jennifer Adams, Executive Director, Network Management, Office of Community Care. We'll also hear from Mr. Christopher Wilbur, Counselor to the Inspector General, Acting Assistant Inspector General for Management and Administration, OIG, Department of Veterans Affairs, and finally we will hear from Mr. Seto Bagdoyan, Director of Forensic Audits and Investigative Service at the Government Accountability Office. You sure don't have short titles there. So we'll move on to questions. I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes, and we'll move through the other members. Mr. Keenegan, maybe I can start with you. I just want to start with a bill that I've introduced that's going to ensure timely survivor payments when a veteran passes away. According to the information that we've requested, VA owed more than $245 million to tens of thousands of veteran survivors and beneficiaries. Now, I know it can be difficult to track down someone whose address or name has changed, but I'm also mindful of the financial hardship that many families face when a loved one dies and the need to pay these families the money that they are owed. So I'm wondering if you could answer the question, what more can be done to identify, locate, and pay these hard-to-reach survivors and beneficiaries?
Chairman Pappas, thank you very much for the question. The VA is supportive of the Faster Payments to Veteran Survivors Act and efforts to encourage prompt payment of life insurance. Paying beneficiaries sooner improves access and in veterans' intended outcomes. And we're actually very supportive and recommend expanding some of the provisions across all VA insurance programs. The efforts that we're taking currently include searching for hard-to-find beneficiaries. We have teams that are dedicated. Each year we locate and pay over 2,000 beneficiaries who may not have their current beneficiary forms updated or finding good location. We've actually contracted with some private firms and found that the efforts that we're doing can provide good assistance in locating people. And so the unclaimed benefits that we see are about 1% to 2% across over 100,000 death claims received each year. Specific efforts that we believe can help are to, as proposed in the legislation, reduce the time to pay alternate beneficiaries from 4 years to 2 years, or other beneficiaries from 2 years to 1 year, in order to be able to get those payments out faster.
Well, thanks very much for those reflections, and I recognize that for the majority of folks, the families are receiving these payments on time. But I'm wondering if you can reflect on the legislation that we've introduced, the Faster Payments to Veterans Survivors Act. I think it addresses this problem on several fronts. It encourages certain process improvements, like better publicizing an online tool for veterans' families that they can use to search for money that they are owed, and it does quicken the time frame for VA to designate and pay appropriate alternative beneficiaries in cases where a primary beneficiary cannot be found. So from your perspective, can you evaluate what kind of an impact this might have at getting money into the hands of those survivors and beneficiaries more quickly, or those that just aren't able to receive the payments today?
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Again, we're very supportive of the provisions that are included for reducing the timeframes. However, the VA does not support some of the provisions in the bill that are related to the website changes and directing of mandatory staffing. I'm sure you're aware that the insurance service is self-funded through veteran-paid premiums, and any additional costs would be borne by the veteran policyholders through either increased premiums or reduced dividends, not necessarily appropriated funds. As I mentioned earlier, the efforts that we've taken, we've created dedicated teams that use non-traditional ways of searching for veterans and their beneficiaries more, whether it be through increased use of online tools, databases, or social media, as well as linking with the Social Security Administration and other types of databases that are available. The efforts that we took with a contracted commercial beneficiary locator service actually included comparative results against the existing efforts the VA employees took. And I'm happy to say our employees exceeded what the private sector could find. And currently, we started this fiscal year with less than 1,000 unlocated beneficiaries, and we routinely go back and look to raise the bar on what we're doing to find people and ultimately pay them.
Well,
the recommendations.
Thank you for that work, and I'm running out of time right now.
No worries.
I appreciate that progress is being made, and we've got more work to do here, but I'm just wondering if we can have your commitment to continue to work together on realizing some of the improvements that you identified in the legislation, and do that in an expeditious fashion.
Yes, sir. Happy to work with your staff on technical assistance to achieve your intent.
Thank you very much. My time is up. I'll yield 5 minutes to Ranking Member Mann for his questions.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. First question would be for Mr. Murray. Can you please tell me when we can expect VA to provide views on the draft supply chain legislation?
I will have to take that for the record. Our Chief Acquisition Officer and our logistics folks and health administration are probably working that issue. So I am not personally involved in that particular issue. I'll have to get back to you on that.
So I didn't totally understand. So we think it's going to be in a week, in a month, a couple months?
I will have to get back to you on that. I was not anticipating we were going to discuss supply chain. I don't know if there's anyone else here on the VA side that can answer that question from Congressional Affairs or the other organization.
Okay, well, once you find out, if you could just circle back, that'd be great.
Will.
Yeah, thank you,
Absolutely.
Mr. Murray. Next question for Assistant Secretary Donahue. In your written statement opposing my bill, you stated that OSC focuses on the whistleblower while your offices focus on accountability for the wrongdoer. If this were truly the case, what does it tell you that VA officials are still not implementing almost 30% of your office's recommended actions? Frankly, that does not sound like accountability to the wrongdoer, to me, at least at first blush.
Thank you, Ranking Member Mann. And I agree that the statistic is certainly begs questions that need to be looked into. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and I actually believe that the statistic shows that the system's working. It gives us data by which we can now dig down and truly understand perhaps why our recommendations and why our recommendations are taken at times and why they're not taken at times, which is exactly what's happening.
Keeping with that, as I mentioned in my opening statement, timely knowledge of when the department does not accept OAWP's recommendations for discipline is critical to our oversight of the department. In one instance, we received notification for an incident that occurred over 2 years ago. When can we expect the department to start following the law and provide us these notifications when they occur?
Thank you, Ranking Member Mann. We are committed to continuous improvement. We are absolutely committed to transparency with Congress. I understand that notifications were completed through the calendar year, I believe, and those were all received a couple of weeks ago. First report is forthcoming, and I believe that these reports will be both transparent, but mostly allow for a very systemic look at why our recommendations might be taken and why they might not be taken, which I believe is the tool needed to really assess accountability from a systemic perspective.
Okay, and last question for you, Ms. Donahue. Since you started in your position almost 9 months ago, you've been promising this committee that you are conducting a strategic review of the OAWP's processes. When do you expect this review to be completed, and what's been the delay, or why is it taking so long?
Thank you, Ranking Moran. It's actually had a natural life. I don't know that there has been a delay per se, and I've been able to talk in general about some of what we're finding, and actually we are making improvements in processes also in real time. So we are working through this systemically. We're identifying some issues where improvements might be needed. We're putting policy recommendations in place where that might be happening, and it's going to be continuous improvement. That is what accountability is about. It's continuous and constant review and improvement.
Okay, thank you. My last question, Mr. Chairman, would be for Mr. Murray again. I understand that VA does not support the Inspector General training bill as they don't believe it is necessary, but what are the drawbacks to ensuring that such training can never be ignored?
I'd like to refer that question to Harvey Johnson, who has better able to answer that question. Harvey.
Thank you, Ranking Member Mann. We share a common goal with the committee and the IG on reinforcing accountability training and eliminating fear and retaliation so all of our employees feel safe to report wrongdoing and to engage appropriately with the IG. Secretary McDonough in September 2021 directed that all employees be trained on reporting wrongdoing to the IG and that they cooperate fully with audits, investigations, and inspections. The Deputy Secretary followed up and reissued a memo in December of last year, further substantiating that. Right now, this is not a one-time thing. We are now in the process of memorializing these actions through a VA handbook that is in the making. We are working on that now. So we do believe this will be permanent and irreversible. And that's why we don't believe the legislation is necessary at this time.
Okay, I see I'm out of time. Thank you, Chairman Pappas.
Thank you. Representative Underwood, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored that today's hearing includes my Department of Veterans Affairs Office of the Inspector General Training Act of 2021. This bipartisan bill, which I introduced with Representative David McKinley of West Virginia, is a critical step to enhance VA's oversight initiatives and promote accountability at the department by strengthening the Office of the Inspector General, or OIG. Through audits, inspections, investigations, and reviews, the OIG works to improve the efficiency of VA operations and promote the integrity of VA's programs and services. The OIG's work helps protect taxpayer dollars and ensure that veterans receive world-class care and benefits that they've earned. In the most recent 6-month period of available data from October 2020 through March of 2021, the OIG's return on investment was $21 in monetary impact for every dollar spent on oversight. The OIG's role is critical, but the effectiveness of oversight efforts depends on the participation of VA's employees. According to the VA's Inspector General, early and accurate reporting by VA staff can save patients' lives, protect VA employees, ensure veterans receive needed benefits and services, and recoup billions of dollars in monetary recoveries and avoided costs. To ensure that VA staff are prepared to report wrongdoing and cooperate fully with OIG audits and investigations, employees need to receive trainings about whistleblower processes and participation in investigations. My Department of Veterans Affairs OIG Training Act would require every current and future VA employee to participate in the VA's OIG training. This training must include information about mechanisms for reporting fraud, waste, and abuse, and protections for VA employees who report wrongdoings. Mr. Wilbur, can you explain how a requirement for VA employees to participate in the Inspector General's training will help to promote accountability at VA and ultimately ensure the department can best serve our nation's veterans?
Yes, thank you. This legislation is really aimed at fulfilling two important goals. And the first is to ensure that all employees are aware of the Office of Inspector General and of our mission to address fraud, waste, and abuse and patient harm through audits, investigations, and other oversight activities. And it's also important for employees to understand their right to confidentially communicate with our office to raise issues of concern or any suspicions they may have about conduct of the department. The second important aspect is to ensure that all employees are aware of their duties and obligations to report any potential criminal activity or crimes or serious crimes they're aware of to the OIG, and as well as to cooperate with the OIG in our oversight work, including providing complete and accurate responses to document and data requests and in interviews with our staff. Both of these aspects are important, and we have seen time and again in dealing with the department where we will find that there are long-standing known issues by staff that have not been reported to the OIG simply because they either did not know about our authorities or were concerned about retaliation.
And Mr. Wilbur, we know
sorry, go
that
ahead.
Secretary McDonough has required all VA employees to take the OIG training, but given that past secretaries have refused to implement this requirement and future secretaries could roll back this administration's policy as well, why is it so important to codify the training requirement through my bill?
For exactly the reasons you said. I mean, this is, future secretaries can rescind this training even if put into a VA directive. VA directives can be changed. And our recent experience in the VA OIG with both a prior secretary and a prior acting secretary showed that not all VA leaders share the same commitment to our mission and our oversight that the current secretary may demonstrate. And so it's important that this be codified, that the department not be able to remove this requirement in the future. And ensuring that this training goes forward is really critical, continuing to allow employees to protect VA assets, patients, and other employees going forward. One other critical aspect of this legislation, in addition to just the training, is it gives the Inspector General access to the VA email system in order to communicate with all employees, something which the Inspector General is unable to do now. And that is important both to reinforce the training going forward and to provide alerts to employees about emergent issues of fraud or other issues that we've identified at the department that we think employees should be aware of.
Well, thank you so much. This is a common sense bill that will protect veterans and improve the quality of care at VA. I thank VA's Office of the Inspector General for supporting my legislation, as well as the American Legion and the Veterans for Foreign Wars, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to advance this bipartisan bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
General Bergman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's get right to the questions, folks. Mr. Johnson, one of the draft bills on today's agenda would create a new Office of Diversity and Inclusion. VA's written testimony states that the department is already taking steps along these lines. Do you believe we really need legislation to accomplish this? Especially, it would seem to me that you do not need it if you're already doing it.
Thank you for that question, Congressman Bergman. VA is pleased with the engagement we have already had with this committee on inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, which we refer to as IDEA. The goal of this bill is in line with our actions already underway. Specifically, we are moving forward now with hiring a chief diversity officer. A position description has been created and the search for a chief diversity officer is underway. And that person would report to our Deputy Secretary Donald Remy.
So you're hiring more FTEs to do this, or are you taking from in-hide and transferring folks from already existing VA employees to create the office?
So we are still working that, but I believe this will be a political appointee. So we are working with our Chief of Staff and Deputy Chief of Staff to do this. So no, it would be a Chief Diversity Officer hired under that authority.
So I heard you say a political appointee, an additional political appointee or an existing political appointee moved from one task to another?
I believe this will be an additional political appointee.
Okay. Mr. Wilbur, just as a baseline, can you please remind us what the return on investment is for the Office of Inspector General?
It's about $20 to $25 for every dollar spent.
Okay. How do you determine that?
Based on the recommendations in our report, which often will identify the monetary value that a particular recommendation results in for the department. And so looking at, particularly with audits, looking at return on investment.
Let me ask you a question. I came out of the private sector, and in business, I mean, we had to be able to figure out and show via charts, via whatever, the return on investment. So is it possible to get a chart or something that actually shows the math and shows how it equates to $20 to $25? Yes,
absolutely. We can work on that.
Okay.
I don't know that we have that in hand, but as a chart, but we can work on that.
Well, you know, math is real simple. 2 and 2 still have to equal 4, you know, but sometimes in the evolution of federal budgeting, we've seen that is not always the case. That's bottom line from my experience in my first term as a member of the Budget Committee. And the title of the 26-page article was The Evolution of Federal Budgeting, but math is still math. Also, Mr. Wilbur, while not the subject of today's hearing, can you please provide us your view on giving the IG limited testimonial subpoena power and how that could help ensure that your investigations are not hindered by non-VA employees' unwillingness to participate in your investigation? So how do you compel people? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. No, we still believe that testimonial subpoena authority is important and it remains a priority for our office. In just the last few weeks or months, we've had a couple of different projects that we've been working on where we have been unable to obtain testimony from individuals whom we wanted to obtain testimony. And one of those involved a senior VA official who was involved in substantial procurements. We had an investigation underway looking at some of the procurement activity and some sort of ethical issues relating to relationships with outside entities. We had sought to obtain testimony from that employee. She declined to do so voluntarily. Before we could move to compel, she resigned from the VA, thereby rendering her, us unable to compel her testimony.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Chairman, with that, I will almost yield back. And that is, it's really weird looking at, in this case, when you testify here, I'm looking at the same person twice. I can't wait till we get everybody back here in person, eyeball to eyeball. Thank you, and I yield back.
Well, if you stick around for the second panel, we've got our whole second panel right here with us, and we can't wait to get to you. But we've got a few more questions here for panel 1, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Mervan for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. I'm happy to be here today to discuss the draft language of my bill, the Department of Veterans Affairs Data Collection and Management Improvement Act. That will dramatically improve the way VA stores the utilized data on its beneficiaries. We've heard too many stories about how the decentralized nature of VA's data has cost veterans time and money. Veterans are frequently made to update changes to their information, such as names, addresses, or phone numbers via multiple methods with multiple offices in order to ensure the VA has the current and correct information on them. In 2022, there is no reason that VA systems are not speaking to each other. This is an issue that VA must address. My bill will improve the VA's data collection for beneficiaries and provide a better understanding of who the VA is serving. The bill also calls for VA to establish a single source of truth for veterans, data to improve access to quality care and benefits. I look forward to hearing from the VSOs who are participating today on the importance of collecting this information. I also look forward to continuing to work with the VSO community to identify areas of need for veterans. I hope my colleagues will support this bill as well. I look forward to working with them to finalize this legislation and introduce it shortly. It is past the time that VA solve its data issues and remove this burden from the veterans. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I see Representative Kahele's back on. I'll recognize you for 5 minutes of questions.
Mahalo Chairman Pappas and Ranking Member Mann for the opportunity to participate in this hearing in support of my bill, HR 5776, the Serving Our LGBTQ Veterans Act, which works to address the unique needs of and barriers to accessing VA resources for veterans who are LGBTQ. This bipartisan legislation, co-led by HVAC member Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina, would create a center for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer veterans to convene initiatives addressing the unique needs of these veterans and to serve as a principal advisor advocating for veterans who are LGBTQ in Department of Veteran Affairs policy, benefits, and program decisions. Our LGBTQ veterans who honorably put their lives on the line for our country deserve our full support and equal treatment. We must ensure they have access to the benefits they have earned. The Serving Our LGBTQ Veterans Act calls for equity and inclusion in veteran services to match the great diversity of our veteran community and address the unique challenges facing our long underserved LGBTQ veterans. The Serving Our LGBTQ Veterans Act builds on the precedent of the Veterans Benefits Improvement Act of 1994 and the success of the Center for Minority Veterans and the Center for Women's Veterans. For nearly 3 decades, these centers have raised and helped address the unique challenges impacting the veterans in their communities. And these centers, along with additional VA initiatives, have worked to address the needs of LGBTQ veterans. However, 10 years after the repeal of the harmful Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, these veterans still do not have a central body within the VA to focus on their needs and to address the inequities and stigma they still face. These veterans continue to experience a disproportionate risk in sexual assault, suicide, PTSD, and other chronic conditions, due in part to lack of access to services and social support. There is also great diversity, even among the LGBTQ community, and we must ensure the VA can address the unique needs of each of these communities. Establishing the Center for LGBTQ Veterans would improve veteran services to address these unique challenges and has broad support from veteran service organizations or VSOs. This bipartisan legislation is endorsed by 10 VSOs, including those we will hear from later today: the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Minority Veterans of America, and Modern Military Association of America, as well as Paralyzed Veterans of America, AMVETS, For All Vets, American Veterans for Equal Rights, Transgender American Veterans Association, and SPARTA. As I previously mentioned in Congress, this legislation also has bipartisan support, including from members of this committee, and my co-lead on this legislation, Congresswoman Mace. This broad support among my colleagues in Congress and the veteran services community reminds us of the need for swift and intentional action to ensure our LGBTQ veterans have access to services and programs designed with their needs in focus. Mahalo to Chairman Pappas, Ranking Member Mann, and the members of the subcommittee for your timely consideration of this legislation. As a veteran myself, I know the importance of access to VA resources and benefits, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. Deputy Assistant Secretary Murray, as you stated, the VA has taken great steps to improve services reaching LGBTQ veterans. You also mentioned that the VA supports the goal of the Serving Our LGBTQ Veterans Act. Would you please share more information on the work still needed to ensure these veterans are able to access the benefits they earned through their service?
We would be pleased to. I would like to refer that question, Congressman, to Harvey Johnson, who has those details.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you for that question, Congressman Kahele. VA does not oppose this bill. We welcome the opportunity to have this discussion for all of our LGBTQ plus veterans and employees. And we've taken a number of steps. Some of them include Secretary McDonough approved the VA's first ever Pride Employee Resource Group last April. We have an active LGBTQ plus work group. Last summer, the Secretary announced and VA initiated the rulemaking process. This is a process that will help VA realize the standards of care consistent with industry and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH. With regards to the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal, VA announced last fall under its existing authority to offer relief to those discharged from the military service. Last September, Secretary McDonough promulgated a memorandum providing for a character of discharge review. VA adjudicators shall find that all discharged service members whose separation was due to sexual orientation, gender identity, or HIV status are considered veterans who are eligible for VA benefits, so long as the record doesn't implicate a statutory or regulatory bar to benefits. Now, to date, with our messaging and working with VSOs, this effort has had an amazing impact and reach, as VBA has seen the number of requests increase to over 12,000 that have come to us for this review, received from last June to this March. So we are making strides in this area, and we very much appreciate the support of this committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Murray, and I appreciate Secretary McDonough's leadership for LGBTQ veterans leading the VA. Thank you, Chairman Pappas, Ranking Member Mann, for the opportunity to participate in this hearing, and I will yield back the overbalance of my time. Mahalo.
Thank you very much. I've got a few more here, so I'll yield myself 5 more minutes for questions. Mr. Bagdoyan, maybe I could start with you. I was really pleased that VA concurred, or at least concurred in principle, with all 10 recommendations that GAO made in its December report, which identified about 1,600 healthcare providers who were ineligible to participate in the community care program. And it appears that VA has taken some steps to address the recommendations. And so I'm wondering, in your view, why might this legislation still be needed? And also, what are the risks to VA and the veterans it serves if ineligible providers are allowed to remain in the department's community care networks?
Sure. Thank you for your question, Mr. Chairman. I would say that VA is in the process of implementing our recommendations. We expect more detail from the department sometime in July in terms of specific action, so that is certainly important. I believe the subcommittee's bill could do 2 things. First, it would provide additional impetus for quick and decisive VA action across the board, including our recommendations to address the risks that we've identified. And also, perhaps more specifically, the individual requirements for planning, certification, and reporting would help sustain progress and accountability in the long term, which is something very important. And in this regard, I would note that if the reporting requirement were extended beyond the one and done, essentially, version that you have in your bill right now, that would be even more helpful until all those recommendations and the steps identified in the bill itself are completed with reasonable assurance that they are done as intended and they are actually effective as well. Now, regarding the risk you mentioned in the second part of your question, we're talking about risk to the safe care of veterans, where there is actually no margin for error in this regard. And in terms of one ineligible provider who could cause harm to a veteran, that's essentially one too many. So through the steps that we have identified for improved screening of applicants to join the program, that would be definitely a step forward to help ensure that risk of harm and to provide safe care is implemented.
And do you know if VA took steps to remove from the community care networks the providers that were identified as being likely to be ineligible because they were deceased, their medical licenses were revoked, or they were just otherwise ineligible to provide care for veterans?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we made that referral in late January, so the VA has been working on that. It is a time-consuming, deliberate process, has to be done manually for various technical reasons. We hope to get a progress report on that coming up soon in the next couple of months, hopefully. And that is an important step in addition to our recommendations that the VA is taking to, again, help minimize the risk of harm to veterans' healthcare.
Well, let me see what kind of a progress report I can get right now. Ms. Adams, maybe I can turn to you and just ask what VA has done in the 3 months since the GAO report was released, and if you're confident that all 1,600 ineligible providers have been deactivated at this point.
Hi, thank you, Chairman Pappas, for the question. As Mr. Begdalian has said, it is a laborious-intensive manual review process. So we are continuing to undergo the process. The information that we received from GAO as part of this gave us the 1,600 providers with their NPI, and then we are meticulously going through each of the systems that have been identified in your bill to identify and determine what information would exclude those providers from participation in CCN. That review is still ongoing. We hope to complete that within the next several weeks and have greater information to be able to provide.
Thank you for that update. We look forward to that information and hope you can move as swiftly as possible through that list. In the remaining time I have, maybe I can turn to Assistant Secretary Donaghy and just touch on the issue of whistleblower retaliations. Basically, during previous hearings, our subcommittee has asked whether recommendations put forward by OAWP have seen implementation, and I'm wondering how many recommendations for action does OAWP send to the Secretary regarding retaliation cases, and how many of them have been implemented or rejected?
Thank you, Chair Pappas. The data that I have that can supplement some of the information that was briefed to your staff is for the calendar year of 21, there was a total of 57 disciplinary recommendations. There are also non-disciplinary recommendations, some of which involve whistleblower protections as well. But the disciplinaries were 57. 15 of those were whistleblowers. In this first quarter of 22, the OAWP has issued 12 recommendations, and 2 of those involve whistleblowers. As I only have the general, I'm happy to get that information to you as specific to whistleblowers. I have general information regarding management when they take or don't take our recommendations. And for the calendar year of 21, it's about half and half. Half meaning that our recommendations were not taken, half meaning that at least some disciplinary recommendations were taken, but even amongst that group, a lesser amount, the exact amount that we recommended was not taken. And the data from first quarter 22, there's only a very small handful of information that we have so far, given that we just don't have the management results yet.
Okay, I'm way over my time here, but maybe I can just do one yes or no question for you.
Sure.
Should Congress give you more power to ensure that action is taken when whistleblowers are harmed?
I think that the tools in the statute are.
I'm just looking for a quick
really,
one here. Yes, no, or maybe something in between.
It is something in between, Chairman Pappas.
Okay.
I think that.
Well, why don't we explore that? Since I'm a couple minutes over here, I want to give other members time to participate. But thank you very much for that.
Certainly.
General Bergman, I'll recognize you for 5 minutes.
No, I yield back. No questions.
Okay. I don't see that we have anyone online, but maybe Ms. Donaghy, if I can just give you any remaining time to address that last question, and then we'll move on.
Certainly. The tools that Congress has given us within the statute, I believe are really significant tools. And as you know, the first couple of years of the office had some challenging times. And so it's really just been within the last year or so, or 2 years, roughly speaking, Chair Pappas, that we've really been able to operationalize the tools in the statute to understand them at a level in terms of how they're working, where improvements are needed. And simply speaking, I think that time's important to really get down to what's working, what's not working, what needs more resources given tools that are already there, and perhaps what tools aren't there. And so that was my in-between, and I apologize for the non-yes or no, but I think it's an important in-between perspective.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, and appreciate the time of everyone on this panel, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all. Thank you for your time here today, and seeing no additional questions, I think this concludes the first panel of hearing witnesses. And so I'll invite the second panel up here. I see you all in the audience, so please come forward. Well, I want to thank our second panel of witnesses here, and I'll just quickly run through the list while they're getting settled. First, we have Tiffany Ellett, Health Policy Coordinator at the American Legion. Welcome. We also have Patrick Murray, Legislative Director at the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Our third witness is Jennifer Dane, Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director at the Modern Military Association of America. And finally, we have Lindsay Church, Executive Director and Co-Founder at the Minority Veterans of America. So welcome, everyone. We're just going to go right into the questions. We appreciate your submission of testimony, which has been taken for the record. And I'll start by recognizing Ranking Member Bergman for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the accommodation. Mr. Murray, what is your impression of the effectiveness of the Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection? Let me just add a little bit. With an annual budget, roughly $28 million, do you believe that veterans and taxpayers are seeing appropriate level of results for this level of funding?
General, I don't know if I could put a price tag on whistleblower protection. I think it's an incredibly important thing. The Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection stood up in 2017, had noble intentions, and we believe it's a necessary function. But frankly, tightening the belt, making sure that they're doing what's intended. We have no issue with taking a look at OAWP and making sure that they're following through in their critical mission.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, this is for any or all of you who would like to answer the following question. On this legislative hearing is a draft bill to authorize a VA supply chain management system. Ranking Member Mann and I believe it is very important for Congress to authorize large projects like this to control the project's scope and funding. Do you share our belief that we need to authorize large projects before the VA begins them to avoid the disasters of the past? Again, let's keep the cart behind the horse in the authorization. Anybody want to offer comment? You want to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down?
General, as we saw in recent reports, Dimmel's was reported to have less than 44% accuracy in providing its mission. So we absolutely believe that they need a proper supply chain management. As we saw recently with COVID-19, VA stood up fourth mission in every state around the country. It's a necessary system that we need to make sure works properly. In terms of authorizing the projects, we think that Congress should exercise its oversight authorities in that sense.
Okay. And can you, Mr. Murray, since I'll go back to you, can you please tell us more about your recommendation in your written testimony that the VA Office of Inspector General be given limited testimonial subpoena power? Could you please expand on that for us?
Yes, sir. We don't believe that the OIG is as capable as possible. Other government agencies, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and Health and Human Services all have testimonial subpoena authority. A recent OIG report was unable to examine the full scope of alleged ethics violations between a VA senior executive and a higher education advocacy group, VES. Numerous times throughout the report were mentions of the now former employee and the president of their higher education advocacy group, VES, refusing to speak with OIG. These are things that we need OIG to get to the bottom of some of these issues. We think it's critical to give them the same authorities as other government agencies.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I thank you for the accommodation.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, General Bergman. Well, I've got a few questions here, and Ms. Dane, maybe I can start with you, as well as Lindsay Church. The Serving Our LGBTQ Veterans Act would establish an LGBTQ center at VA, similar to the centers for minority and women veterans that are already in existence. The LGBTQ Center would serve as a principal advisor to the Secretary for adopting and implementing policies and programs that affect veterans in its constituency. And I'm wondering if you can each elaborate on how such a center focused on LGBTQ veterans would affect access to VA benefits and services, and address some of the unique barriers that we've explored in previous hearings. So Jennifer, Dane, maybe we can start with you.
Absolutely, Chairman Pappas. Well, we know that the LGBTQ community is very large. We know that while the VHA is able to assess, that they are unable to assess the exact number of LGBTQ veterans because there's system limitations. There is a barrier today on data collection, so the assessment from the VA is about 1 million, but our organization assesses there's probably over 2.5 million at that. We do know that there are startling statistics in the literature for healthcare for LGBTQ members. That's established in the literature. However, if you look at the literature of research and the body of research within the LGBTQ military community, it's limited. So we know that there are going to be more mental health concerns, substance abuse, intimate partner violence. And then we look at the history of Don't Ask, Don't Tell that has not even been rectified correctly. And we know that there's even more PTSD claims that are going to be apparent in not only the VHA, but also need to be seen in VBA. So creating this center would not only streamline the process for us to be finally recognized as a community of folks, since we're not under the minority veterans within the VA system. We're left in the margins and almost as an invisible population. So this center is needed quite largely. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Lindsay.
Thank you. So first and foremost, we're very supportive of this piece of legislation and the creation of a center for LGBTQ veterans. Right now, there's a piecemeal system that's happening for LGBTQ veterans. One office is responsible for one thing, one office is responsible for the other, and overall coordination of this support system within VA is not existent. In addition, there's major health equity issues that are happening for the LGBTQ community. From just studies alone, we know that LGBTQ veterans have a greater risk for suicidal ideation, mental health crisis, homelessness, military sexual trauma. There's no single point of truth within the VA to work on these issues and to really dig into the larger trends that are happening for our community. As Jennifer pointed out, we don't even know how many LGBTQ veterans there are in the country. Studies point to 1 million LGBTQ veterans that is from the year 2000 that was released in 2003. That's 20 years. We have zero understanding of what's happening for the LGBTQ community except for the problems that are happening and the trends that we're seeing in the homelessness and suicide numbers. If we're really going to dig in, even VA has concurred that they don't have enough research, they don't have enough data, they don't have enough support to be able to truly address the issues of LGBTQ veterans. Having this center is imperative if we're going to move forward. Every single one of the members on this committee have LGBTQ veterans in their districts that are being underserved by the VA currently. This center is imperative for the future of our community.
Thank you for those comments. And Ms. Ellett, maybe I can turn to you, and I'm just wondering if you can reflect on that, and from the American Legion's perspective, what your thoughts are on the creation of this center.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The American Legion believes that there needs to be a center for this community, something that we've been speaking with the VA's Office of Healthcare Innovation and Learning about is a program that's a newer program that was created under that office. It's called Pride in All Who Served. And what it does is it's dedicated to creating a support network through the LGBTQ plus community by connecting individuals within that community. In order to connect them, they train VA staff to facilitate those connections. Right now, there are over 900 providers are trained in this, and there's over 40 sites that are using this program right now. But the program has no place to live. So right now, it's underneath the innovation office, as in it's past the piloting phase, and they've created it there, but now they don't know where to send it. So something like this center would be amazing for not only breaking down the barriers and connecting that community in the healthcare, but it would also be a place where these kind of programs for things like suicide prevention or just connecting throughout that community could be a good place to live.
Well, thank you very much. I will recognize myself for another round here. I've got a few more questions. And Ms. Dane, maybe we can start with you on this one. And wondering, given your background working at the Department of Education, how you think partnerships with minority-serving institutions and professional organizations can improve VA's ability to serve all veterans, and also what your thoughts are on making these partnerships permanent through legislation that would ensure a more equitable inclusive culture at VA.
Absolutely. So currently we know that there's 86 HBCUs, there's 21 tribal colleges and universities, and there's 156 Hispanic serving institutions that are four-year institutions. And if we can create a pathway so that the VA can recruit these diverse individuals at minority serving institutions, not only does it create an influx into our workforce, but the future pipelines for more innovation and more training and recruitment can happen. We know that the theory of diversity and inclusion, it's kind of backwards. So when we include these folks, then diversity flourishes. When we have diverse perspectives, then we can have more innovation. So whenever we recruit from these institutions, we're relying on the fact that they bring innovation that we have not seen before. And we know that this should be a bipartisan issue, because especially we look at Texas and Arizona, these places have many of the minority serving institutions that we can gain from. So I think if it's not a bipartisan issue, we need to really look at our state's minority serving institutions and say, what can your state gain from it? Because we know that the VA will gain from it, and so will the states within it.
Thanks for those comments. Mr. Murray, maybe I could turn to you for a question. I'm wondering what ways you would like to see more collaboration and coordination between the department and the VSO community regarding equity and inclusion.
So social support and affirming spaces is something that's very important. Recent report from the Trevor Project shows that LGBT individuals are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide. I think every veteran organization that's testified has made veteran suicide a priority. It's something that we've seen the statistical numbers decrease, but we're not entirely sure why. Right? We'd love to point to something, identify an area that needs resources, push towards it. We think demographic collection is incredibly important. We also think that affirming positive response, as I said, the 8 times is likely to attempt suicide. That number is slashed drastically by individuals that have positive support. We think that this is something that we can work together to make sure that we continue that progress.
Great, thanks for that question. Ms. Ellett, I have one for you as well. I'd asked VA about the approximately 1,600 ineligible providers that GAO helped identify through a review, which is a small number when you consider that there are more than 1 million active providers in the community care networks. But that being said, having one ineligible provider, I think, puts veterans at risk potentially, and would mean that potentially veterans are receiving inadequate care. So beyond some of the specific fixes that we've put forward in this legislation, I'm wondering if you have any other ideas about improving oversight at the VA Office of Community Care.
Well, at the Legion, we believe that VA care is the best care and that community care is VA care. So even just one provider not meeting those credentials in offering anywhere, poor health care to a veteran is unacceptable. as far as increasing oversight beyond the bill, we support the bill in its entirety, and any tracking, reporting, anything that is going to keep an eye on those providers, but is also going to hold VA accountable for holding them accountable, we're going to support.
Well, thank you very much. I know Mr. Mervan has a data collection bill that he's introduced. It changes the way that VA collects and manages veteran data, and I'm just wondering if any one of you have a reaction to that and could tell me how that would impact the veterans you serve.
Congressman, it'll save lives. Knowing the demographics of the veteran population, not only who's utilizing VA care, but also the general veteran population as a whole. One of the things we have a suggestion for is combining this effort with H.R. 5295, the Every Veteran Counts Act. That'll take care of who the overall veteran population is and who's using VA, so we can identify gaps, who's not using VA and why. We think this will save lives because veterans who use VA care have better health outcomes. We want more veterans in VA. We think this is a great way to do it.
Thanks. Lindsay, do you have a reaction?
I absolutely do. With this bill, we're obviously very supportive. We have very little understanding of what's happening with larger health equity issues when it comes to specifically gender and sexual minorities. We need to make the invisible visible. We need to be able to see these trends to be able to work on them substantively. Without this data, we continue to show LGBTQ veterans that they do not count, that their issues don't matter. Tomorrow is Trans Day of Visibility. The best thing that any member of Congress can do is make sure that trans veterans count, and this bill does that.
Thank you. I know you all covered a lot of territory in the written testimony that was submitted to the committee, but maybe in the remaining time, I could just let each of you add any comments, for those who are watching today's hearing about the legislation that, as part of today's hearing, anything this subcommittee should be thinking about as we move forward. Ms. Ellett, if you're prepared, or whoever wants to go first, we'll just dive right into that.
I think one of the main points that we were trying to get across in our testimony that we were going to say earlier is that just imagine having a secret that's so big that would change your life, would change your relationships, would change your career path, would change your health. And imagine keeping that secret and not being able to share it with somebody who could mental health, any mental health professionals in order to help you carry that secret. Imagine the burden that you would carry. And that's what the LGBTQ plus community carried before and under the weight of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So now, after the repeal, we still carry that burden. We still have those issues, and we still need a place that we can feel comfortable and accepted to address those issues and to help us heal. Aside from that, with Secretary McDonough's demand for, or his shift in priority for VA to make timely world-class health care available to veterans, all of the legislation that we talked about today, or that we're discussing today, can help move the VA in that direction.
Thank you. Mr. Murray, any comments on any of the legislation that you haven't referred to yet?
Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about some of these bills. Like I mentioned, the data demographics we believe will save lives. We need to know more. We need to be smarter. Information will only arm us to tackle this problem, not only veteran suicide, as we mentioned, but also making sure that sexual orientation and self-identified gender is captured by physicians so they can provide optimal care for their patients. Putting blinders on and not recognizing who our patients are, it's not ideal. We think this is critical to save lives. The VFW wholeheartedly endorses this. Ms.
Dane.
Yes, thank you so much, Chairman Pappas, for letting us be here. One of the bills that was introduced, or that is going to be introduced, or was today, was Representative David's and Representative Ocasio-Cortez's bill on improving the VA's Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access bill. With that, I mean, I think although our organization is dedicated to LGBTQ veterans, we understand that there's intersectionality that lies with that. Although the VA did say they're hiring a chief diversity officer, we want to make sure that if that is a political appointee position, that they view not only racial and ethnic minorities, but also look at, or underserved populations, but also look at our communities, because, and they should be able to lift the barriers of research that we have. And overall, we know that there are still so many veterans that are suffering from Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and even previous iterations of the policy. There's 114,000 veterans that were discharged dishonorably or other than honorable. And that 12,000 that the VBA estimated that came for review under other than honorable, we would love to have that report and know exactly if those are our veterans, because we don't even know how many veterans were actually impacted. We've had years of FOIA requests, and none have been answered. So we request that Congress really deep dive into understanding, not only the LGBTQ community, but understanding some of the past atrocities that have happened, by asking the VA or even the DOD, how many people were discharged for homosexual conduct? Dishonorable, other than honorable, even honorable. We have folks that are still serving with honorable conditions that have homosexual conduct listed on their DD-214s. So I think this bill would, if nothing else, would address every intersection that we see, and the work of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw whenever she coined the term intersectionality at its crux. So thank you for letting us be here. But at the end of the day, we just want to support not only our veterans, but every veteran out there, because at the end of the day, we need to stand for veterans everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Pappas. There's two bills that I'd like to touch on before we wrap. The first is the Improving VA Workforce Diversity through Minority Serving Institutions. As Jennifer mentioned, this is imperative to creating a more diverse workforce. What this also does is create a more inclusive workforce. We shift the way that we look at patient care. The way that people are educated is different in minority serving institutions. We have a problem with medical racism in our community, in the VA, in all of our healthcare. And that's something that has to be addressed, and one of the best ways that we can do that is to look at the problem differently. The institution's partnerships currently create almost 20,000 people annually that work with the VA. This is an important relationship, and one that has to be forged in documentation, in long-lasting relationships, so that it's not undone at any point in our future history. We need to make sure that these are solidified partnerships, that we continue to make this an imperative, because our community is changing. Right now, our community is consistent of 26% racial and ethnic minorities. By the year 2046, that's going to be 38%. That's a huge shift in our veteran community. That's like millions, 2 million. So this has to happen, and we have to keep these relationships going. The second is, Chairman, you asked a question about what idea folks need to be thinking about. One thing that I would say is we need to be looking at how do we create a safe space in the VA. I cannot tell you how traumatizing it was to be chased into a bathroom as a trans non-binary veteran by a staff member shouting at me from the door that there was a man in the women's restroom. This can't happen. This is happening to me, who has a voice here. What's happening to our community across the country in these facilities? People who look like me are being harmed. People who look like minority veterans are being harmed and traumatized at these facilities. The IDEA task force, the chief diversity officer, everybody on staff needs to be working on creating a safe place. I literally will not walk inside of my VA care facility anymore. I walk around to the women's clinic door that does not enter into the hospital. This is unacceptable. We have to be working on creating a better culture from the top to the bottom. Secretary McDonough is saying all of the right things, and we're very, very grateful for it. Implementation on the ground is not happening. VA is hemorrhaging people. We hear stories every single day about veterans that do not want to receive their care at VA anymore. I'm paying for an outside provider because I don't trust the VA won't kill me. That's a sad day. I fight for this every single day to make sure the VA cares for us, and it is not. That has to be an imperative of the department, and these bills will help that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments, and thank you for sharing your personal experience as well. That's really important for this subcommittee to hear. So thank you to our entire panel for your efforts, for bearing with us here today as well. It's been a helpful discussion, I think, for this subcommittee, and we've got more work to do moving forward. I think we have a good set of bills here. There are some differences on a few of the bills between the majority and minority, but I think these differences can be worked out, and I understand that our respective staffs are already working to find that common ground that's needed to get this legislation moving. All members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include any additional materials, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.